all these gloves get in the way of everything. All right, cool. Good evening, everyone. My name is ZettaiKegerou, and I will be your reader for tonight. I had all my setup, but I'm having to kind of start over a little bit here. So I'm actually going to be going over chapters 4 and 5 of Fall of Reach. So starting at section 2, boot. And we have a nice picture with support right there. It's got our boy, the chief. So, chapter 4, 0530 hours, September 24th, 2517 military calendar, Epsilon Iridian System Reach Military Complex Planet Reach. Wake up, trainee. John rolled over in his cot and went back to sleep. He was dimly aware that this wasn't his room and that there were other people here. A shock jolted him from his bare feet to the base of his spine. He yelled in surprise and fell off the cot. He shook off the disorientation from being nearly asleep and got up. I said, "Up, Boot. You know which way up is?" A man in camouflage uniform stood over John. His hair was shorn and gray at his temples. His dark eyes didn't look human, too big and black, and they didn't blink. He held a silver baton in one hand. He flicked it towards John, and it sparked. John backed away. He wasn't afraid of anything. Only little kids were afraid. But his body instinctively moved as far away from the instrument as possible. Dozens of other men roused the rest of the children. 74 boys and girls screamed and jumped out of their cots. "I am Chief Petty Officer Mendez," the uniformed man next to John shouted. "The rest of these men are your instructors. You will do exactly as we tell you at all times." Mendez pointed to the far end of the cinder block barracks. "Showers are aft. You will all wash and then return here to dress." He opened the trunk at the foot of John's cot and pulled out a matching set of gray sweats. John leaned closer and saw his name stenciled on the chest. John, 117. No slacking on the double. Mendez tapped John between his shoulder blades with the baton. Lightning surged across John's chest. He sprawled on the cot and gasped for breath. "I mean it. Go, go, go." John moved. He couldn't inhale, but he ran away. Clutching his chest, he managed a ragged breath by the time he got to the showers. The other kids looked scared and disoriented. They all stripped off their nightshirts and stepped onto the conveyor, washed themselves in lukewarm soapy water, then rinsed in an icy cold spray. He ran back to his bunk, got into underwear, thick socks, pulled on the sweats, and a pair of combat boots that fit his feet perfectly. "Outside trainees," Mendez announced. "Triple time. March." John and the others stampeded out of the barracks onto a strip of grass. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the edge of the sky was indigo. The grass was wet with dew. There were dozens of rows of barracks, but no one else was up and outside. A pair of jets roared overhead and arced up into the sky. Far away, John heard a metallic crackle. Chief Petty Officer Mendez barked. "You will make 5 equal-length rows, 15 trainees in each." He waited a few seconds as they milled about. "Starting those rows, you know how to count to 15, trainee? Take 3 steps back." John stepped into the second row. As he breathed the cold air, he began to wake up. He started to remember. They had taken him in the middle of the night. They injected him with something, and he slept for a long time. Then the woman who had given him the coin told him he couldn't go back, that he wouldn't see his mother or father. "Jumping jacks," Mendez shouted. "Count off to 100. Ready, go." The officer started the exercise, and John followed his lead. One boy refused for a split second. An instructor was on him instantly. The baton whipped into the boy's stomach. The kid doubled over. "Get with the program, Boot," the trainer snarled. The boy uncurled and started jumping. John had never done so many jumping jacks in his life. His arms and stomach and legs burned. Sweat trickled down his back. 98, 99, 100. Mendez paused. He drew in a deep breath. "Sit-ups." He dropped onto the grass. "Count off to 100, no slacking." John threw himself onto the ground. The first crewman who quits, Mendez said, gets to run around the compound twice, and then gets back here and does 200 sit-ups. Ready, count off. 1, 2, 3. Deep squats followed, then knee bends. John threw up, but that didn't buy him any respite. A trainer descended on him. After a few seconds, John rolled back over and continued. Leg lifts, Mendez continued like he was a machine, as if they all were machines. John couldn't go on, but he knew he'd get batoned again if he stopped. He tried. He had to move. His legs trembled and only sluggishly responded. Rest, Mendez finally called. Trainers, get the water. The trainers wheeled out carts laden with water bottles. John grabbed one and gulped down the liquid. It was warm and slightly salty. He didn't care. It was the best water he ever had. He flopped on his back in the grass and panted. The sun was up now. It was warm. He rolled to his knees and let the sweat drip off of him like a heavy rain. He slowly got up and glanced at the other children. They crouched on the ground, holding their sides, and no one talked. Their clothes were soaked through with perspiration. John didn't recognize anyone from his school here, so he was alone with strangers. He wondered where his mother was, and what a good start, trainees, Mendez told them. Now we run. On your feet. The trainers brandished their batons and herded the trainees along. They jogged down a gravel path through the compound past the cinder block barracks. The run seemed to go on forever. They ran alongside a river, over a bridge, then by the edge of a runway where jets took off straight into the air. Once past the runway, Mendez led them on a zigzagging path of stone. John wanted to think about what had happened, how he got here, and what was going to happen next, but he couldn't think straight. All he could feel was the blood pounding through him, the ache in his muscles, and hunger. They ran into a courtyard of smooth flagstones, a pole in the center, flew the colors of the UNSC, a blue field with stars, and earth in the corner. At the far end of the yard was a building with a scalloped dome and white columns and dozens of white steps leading to an entrance. The words Naval Officers Academy were chiseled into the arch over the entrance. A woman stood on the top step and beckoned them. She wore a white sheet wrapped around her body. She looked old to John, yet young at the same time. Then he saw the motes of light orbiting her head and knew she was an AI. He had seen them on vids. She wasn't solid, but she was still real. Excellent work, Chief Petty Officer Mendez, she said in a resonant, silk-smooth voice. She turned to the children. Welcome. My name is Deja, and I will be your teacher. Please come in. Class is about to start. John groaned out loud. Several of the others grumbled too. She turned and started to walk inside. Of course, she said, if you prefer to skip your lessons, you may continue the morning calisthenics. John double-timed it up the steps. It was cool inside. A tray with crackers and a carton of milk had been laid out for each of them. John nibbled on the dry, stale food, then gulped down his milk. John was so tired he wanted to lay his head down on the desk and take a nap, until Deja started to tell them about the battle and how 300 soldiers fought against thousands of Persian infantry. A holographic countryside appeared in the classroom. The children walked around the miniature mountainsides and hills and let the edge of the illusionary sea lap at their boots. Toy-sized soldiers marched toward what Deja explained was Thermopylae, a narrow strip of land between steep mountains and the sea. Thousands of soldiers marched towards the 300 who guarded the pass. The soldiers fought. Spears and shields splintered, swords flashed, and spilled blood. John couldn't take his eyes off the spectacle. Deja explained that the 300 were Spartans. They were the best soldiers who had ever lived. They had been trained to fight since they were children. No one could beat them. John watched, fascinated, as the holographic Spartans slaughtered the Persian spearmen. He had eaten his crackers, but he was still hungry, so he took the girls next to him when she wasn't looking and munched them down as the battle raged on. His stomach still growled and grumbled. When was lunch, or was it dinner time already? The Persians broke and ran, and the Spartans stood victorious on the field. The children cheered. They wanted to see it again. That's all for today, Deja said. We'll continue tomorrow, and I'll show you some wolves. Now it's time for you to go to the playground. Playground? John said. That was perfect. He could finally just sit on a swing, relax, and think for a moment. He ran out of the room, as did the other trainees. Chief Petty Officer Mendez and the trainers waited for them outside the classroom. Time for the playground, Mendez said, and waved the children closer. It's a short run, fall in. The short run turned into 2 miles, and the playground was like nothing John had ever seen. It was a forest of 20-meter tall wooden poles, rope cargo nets, and bridges stretched between the poles. They swayed, crossed, and crisscrossed one another, a maze suspended in the air. There were slide poles and knotted climbing ropes. There were swings and suspended platforms. There were ropes looped through pulleys and tied to baskets that looked sturdy enough to hoist a person. Trainees, Mendez said, formed 3 lines. The instructors moved in to herd them, but John and the others made 3 rows without comment or fuss. The first person in every row will be team number 1, Mendez said. The second person in each row will be team number 2, and so on. If you do not understand this, speak up now. No one spoke. John looked to his right. A boy with sandy hair, green eyes, and darkly tanned skin gave him a weary smile. Stenciled on his sweat top was Samuel 034. In the row beyond Samuel was a girl. She was taller than John and skinny, with a long mane of hair dyed blue. Kelly 087. She didn't look too happy to see him. Today's game, Mendez explained, is called Ring the Bell. He pointed to the tallest pole on the playground. It stood an additional 10 meters above the others and had a steel slide pole next to it. Hung at the very top of that pole was a brass bell. There are many ways to get to the bell, he told them. I leave it up to each team to find their own way. When every member of your team has rung the bell, you are to get groundside double time and run back here across this finish line. Mendez took his baton and scratched a straight line in the sand. John raised his hand. Mendez glared at him for a moment with those black, unblinking eyes. A question, trainee? What do we win? Mendez cocked one eyebrow and appraised John. You win dinner, number 117. Tonight, dinner is roast turkey, gravy, and mashed potatoes, corn on the cob, brownies, and ice cream. A murmur of approval swept through the children. But, Mendez added, for there to be winners, there must be a loser. The last team to finish goes without food. The children fell silent, and then looked at each other warily. Make ready, Mendez said. I'm Sam, the boy whispered to John and the girl on their team. She said, I'm Kelly. John just looked at them and said nothing. The girl would slow him down. Too bad. He was hungry and he wasn't about to let them make him lose. Go, Mendez shouted. John ran through the pack of children and scrambled up the cargo net onto a platform. He raced across the bridge, jumped onto the next platform just in time. The bridge flipped and sent 5 others into the water below. He paused at the rope tied to the large basket. It ran up through a pulley and then back down. He didn't think he was strong enough to pull himself up in it. Instead, he tackled a knotted climbing rope and scrunched his body up. The rope swung wildly around the center pole. John looked down and almost lost his grip. It looked twice as far down as it had from the ground. He saw all the others, some climbing, others floundering in the water, getting up and starting over. No one was as close to the bell as he was. He swallowed his fear and kept climbing up. He thought of the ice cream and chocolate brownies and how he was going to win. John got to the top, grabbed the bell, and rang it 3 times. He then collapsed the steel pole and slid all the way to the ground, falling into a pile of cushions. He got up and ran, smiling all the way to Chief Petty Officer. John crossed the finish line and gave a victory cry. I was first, he said, panting. Mendez nodded and made a check on his clipboard. John watched as the others made it up, rang the bell, then raced across to the finish line. Kelly and Sam had trouble. They got stuck in line to get to the bell as everyone bunched up at the end. They finally rang the bell, slid down together, but they crossed the finish line last. They glared at John. He shrugged. Good work, trainees, Mendez said, and he beamed at all of them. He beamed at them all. Let's get back to the barracks and chow down. The children, covered in mud and leaning on each other, cheered. All except Team 3, Mendez said, and looked at Sam, Kelly, and John. But I won, John protested. I was first. Yes, you were first, Mendez explained, but your team came in last. He then addressed all the children. Remember this. You don't win unless your team wins. One person winning at the expense of the group means that you lose. John ran in a stepper all the way back to the barracks. It wasn't fair. He had won. How can you win and still lose? He watched as the others stuffed themselves with turkey, white meat, dripping with gravy. They spooned down mountains of vanilla ice cream and left the mess hall with chocolate encrusting the corners of their mouths. John got a liter of water. He drank it, but it didn't have any taste. It did nothing to fill his hunger. He wanted to cry, but he was too tired. He collapsed on his bunk, thinking of ways to get even with Sam and Kelly for messing him up. But he couldn't think. Every muscle and bone ached. John fell asleep as soon as his head hit the flat pillow. I'm going to take a pause here because I need some water. Okay, let's go. The next day was the same. Calisthenics and running all morning, then class until the afternoon. Today, Deja taught them about wolves. The classroom became a holographic meadow, and the children watched 7 wolves hunt a moose. The pack worked together, striking whenever the giant beast wasn't facing. It was fascinating and horrifying to watch the wolves track down and then devour an animal many times their size. John avoided Sam and Kelly in the classroom. He stole a few extra crackers when no one was looking, but they did nothing to dull his hunger. After class, they ran back to the playground. Today it was different. There were fewer bridges and more complicated rope and pulley systems. The pole with the bell was now 20 meters taller than any of the others. Same teams as yesterday, Mendez announced. Sam and Kelly walked up to John. Sam shoved him. John's temper flared. He wanted to hit Sam in the face, but he was too tired. He'd need all his strength to get to the bell. You better help us, Sam hissed, or I'll push you off one of those platforms. And I'll jump on top of you, Kelly added. Okay, John whispered. Just try not to slow me down. John examined the course. It was like doing a maze on paper, only this one twisted and turned into and out of the page. Many bridges and rope ladders led to dead ends. He squinted and found one possible route. He nudged Sam and Kelly, then pointed. Look, he said, that basket and rope on the far side, it goes straight to the top. It's a long pull, though. He flexed his bicep, uncertain if he could make it in his weakened state. We can do it, Sam said. John glanced at the other teams. They were searching the course as well. We'll have to make a quick run for it, he said. Make sure no one else gets there first. I'm fast, Kelly said. Real fast. Trainees, get ready, Mendez shouted. Okay, John said. You sprint ahead and hold it for us. Go. Kelly shot forward. John had never seen anyone move like her. She ran like the wolves he had seen today. Her feet seemed to barely touch the ground. She got to the basket. John and Sam were only halfway there. One boy beat them to the basket. Get out, he ordered Kelly. I'm going up. Sam and John ran up and pushed him back. Wait your turn, Sam said. John and Sam joined Kelly in the basket. Together they pulled on the rope and raised themselves up. There was a lot of rope. For every 3 meters they pulled, they only rose 1 meter. A breeze made the basket sway and bounce into the pole. Faster, John urged. They pulled as one person, 6 hands, working in unison, and accelerated into the sky. They didn't get there first. They were third. Each of them got to ring the bell, though. Kelly, Sam, and John. They slid down the pole. Kelly and Sam waited for John to land, and then together they ran across the finish line. Chief Petty Officer Mendez watched them. He didn't say anything, but John thought he saw his smile flicker across his face. Sam clapped John and Kelly on their backs. That was good work, Sam said. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, We can be friends. I mean, if you want, it'd be no big deal. Kelly shrugged and replied, Sure. Okay, John said. Friends. I'm going into chapter 5 here, but... Okay. I also give up on trying to hold this thing. Chapter 5. 0630 hours, July 12, 2519, military calendar. Epsilon Iridian System, Reach Military Wilderness Training Preserve, Planet Reach. John held on tight as the dropship accelerated up and over a jagged snow-capped mountain range. The sun peeked over the horizon and washed the white snow with pinks and oranges. The other members of his unit pressed their faces to the windows and watched. Sam sat next to him and looked outside. Nice place for a snowball fight. You'll lose, Kelly said. She leaned over John's shoulder to get a better look at the terrain. I'm a dead aim with snowballs. She scratched the stubble of her shorn hair. Dead is right, John muttered, especially when you load them with rocks. Chief Petty Officer Mendez stepped from the cockpit into the passenger compartment. The trainee stood and snapped to attention. At ease and sit down. The silver at Mendez's temples had grown to a band across the side of his closely shaved hair. But if anything, he had gotten stronger and tougher. Since John had first laid eyes on him 2 years ago. Today's mission will be simple for a change. Mendez's voice easily penetrated the roar of the dropship's engines. He handed a stack of papers to Kelly. Pass these out, recruit. Sir, she saluted smartly and handed one paper to each of the 75 children in the squad. These are portions of maps of the local region. You will be set down by yourselves. You will then navigate to a marked extraction point and we will pick you up there. John turned his map over. It was just one part of a larger map. No drop or extraction point marked. How's he supposed to navigate without a reference point? But he knew this was part of the mission, to answer that question on his own. One more thing, Mendez said. The last trainee to make it to the extraction point will be left behind. He glanced out a window, and it's a very long walk back. John didn't like it. He wasn't going to lose, but he didn't want anybody else to lose either. The thought of Kelly or Sam or any of the others marching all the way back made him uneasy, if they could make it all the way back alone over those mountains. First drop in 3 minutes, Mendez barked. Trainee 117, you're up first. Sir, yes, sir, John replied. He glanced out the window and scanned the terrain. There was a ring of jagged mountains, a valley thick with cedars, and a ribbon of silver, a river that fed into a lake. John nudged Sam, pointed to the river, then jerked his thumb toward the lake. Sam nodded, then pulled Kelly aside and pointed out the window. Kelly and Sam moved quickly down the line of seated trainees. The ship decelerated. John felt his stomach rise as they dropped towards the ground. Trainee 117, front and center. Mendez stepped to the rear of the compartment as the ship's tail split and a ramp extended. Cold air blasted into the ship. He patted John on the shoulder. Watch out for wolves in the forest, 117. Yes, sir. John looked over his shoulder at the others. Yes, sir. John looked over his shoulder at the others. His teammates gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Good, everyone got his message. He ran down the ramp and into the forest. The dropship's engines roared to life and it rose into the cloudless sky. He zipped up his jacket. He wore only fatigues, boots, and a heavy parka. Not exactly the gear he'd packed for a prolonged stay in the wilderness. John started towards one particularly sharp peak he had spotted from the air. The river lay in that direction. He'd follow it downstream and meet the others at the lake. He marched through the woods until he heard the gurgling of a stream. He got close enough to see the direction of the flow, then headed back into the forest. Mendez's exercises often had a twist to them. Stun mines on obstacle courses, snipers with paint pellet guns during parade drills, and the chief up in that dropship. And with the chief up in that dropship, John wasn't about to reveal his position unless he had a good reason. He passed the blueberry bush and took the time to strip it before he moved on. This was the first time in months he had been alone and could just think. He popped a handful of berries into his mouth and chewed. He thought about the place that had been his home, his parents. But more and more that seemed like a dream. John knew it wasn't, and that he had once had a different life. But this was the life he wanted. He was a soldier. He had an important job to train for. Mendez said they were Navy's best and brightest, that they were the only hope for peace. He liked that. Before he knew what he would be when he grew up, before he never knew what he would be when he grew up, he never really thought about anything other than watching vids and playing. Nothing had been a challenge. Now every day was a challenge and a new adventure. John knew more things thanks to Deja than he ever thought he could have learned at his old school. Algebra and geometry, the history of 100 battles and kings. He could strip a trip line, fire a rifle, and treat a chest wound. Mendez had shown him how to be strong, not only with his body, but strong with his head too. He had a family here, Kelly, Sam, and all the others in his squad. The thought of his squad mates brought him back to Mendez's mission. One of them was going to be left behind. There had to be a way to get them all home. John decided he wasn't going to leave if he couldn't figure it out. He arrived at the edge of the lake, stood, and listened. John heard an owl hooting in the distance. He marched toward the sound. "Hey, owl," he said when he was close. Sam stepped out from behind a tree and grinned. "That's Chief Owl to you, trainee." They walked around the circumference of the lake, gathering the rest of the children in the squad. John counted them to make sure 74. "Let's get the map pieces together," Kelly suggested. "Good idea," John said. "Sam, take 3 and scout the area. I don't want any of Chief's surprises sneaking up on us." "Right." Sam picked Fajad, James, and Linda, and then the 4 of them took off into the bush. Kelly collected the map pieces and settled in the shade of an ancient cedar tree. "Some of these don't belong, and some of these are copies," she said as she laid them out. "Yes, here's an edge. Got it, this is the lake, the river, and here." She pointed to a distant patch of green. "That's got to be the extraction point." She shook her head and frowned. "If the legend on this map is right, it's a full day's hike, though. We'd better get started." John whistled, and a moment later, Sam and his scouts returned. "Let's move out," John said. No one argued. They fell into line behind Kelly as she navigated. Sam blazed a trail ahead. He had the best eyes and ears. Several times he stopped and signaled everyone to freeze or hide, but it turned out to be just a rabbit or a bird. After several miles of marching, Sam dropped back. He whispered to John, "This is too easy. It's not like any of the Chief's normal field exercises." John nodded. "I've been thinking that too. Just keep your eyes and ears sharp." They stopped at noon to stretch and eat berries they had gathered along the trail. Fajad spoke up. "I want to know one thing," he said. He paused to wipe the sweat off his dark skin. "We're going to get to the extraction point at the same time, so who's getting left behind? We should decide now." "Draw straws," someone suggested. "No," John said, and stood. "No one's being left behind. We're going to figure a way to get all of us out." "How?" Kelly asked as she scratched her head. Mendez said, "I know what he said, but there's got to be a way. I just haven't thought of one yet. Even if it has to be me that stays behind, I'll make sure everyone gets back to the base." John started marching again. "Come on, we're wasting time." Quick break. Come on, we're wasting time. The others fell in behind him. The shadows of the trees lengthened and melted together, and the sun turned the edge of the sky red. Kelly halted and motioned for everyone else to stop. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Me and Sam will scout it out," John said. "Everyone fall out and keep quiet." The rest of the children silently followed his orders. John and Sam crept through the underbrush and then hunkered down at the edge of the meadow. The dropship sat in the center of a grassy field. Her floodlights illuminated everything for 30 meters. 6 men sat on the open launch ramp, smoking cigarettes and passing a canteen between themselves. Sam motioned to drop back. "You recognize them?" he whispered. "No. You?" Sam shook his head. "They're not in uniform. They don't look like any soldiers I've ever seen. Maybe they're rebels. Maybe they stole the dropship and killed the chief." "No way," John said. "Nothing can kill the chief. But one thing's for sure, I don't think we can just walk up there and get a free ride back to the base. Let's go back. They crept back into the woods and then explained the situation to the others. What do you want to do? Kelly asked them. John wondered why she thought he had an answer. He looked around and saw everyone was watching him, waiting for him to speak. He shifted on his feet. He had to say something. Okay, we don't know who these men are or what they'll do when they see us, so we find out. The children nodded, seeming to think it was the right thing to do. Here's how, John told them. First, I'll need a rabbit. That's me, Kelly said and sprang to her feet. I'm the fastest. Good, John said. You go to the edge of the meadow and let them see you. I'll go along and hide nearby and watch in case anything happens. In case anything happens to you, I'll report back to the others. She nodded. Then you lure a few back here. Run right past this spot. Sam, you'll be out in the open pretending like you've broken your leg. Gotcha, Sam said. He walked over to Bajad and had him scrape his shin with his boot. Blood welled from the wound. The rest of you, John said, wait in the woods in a big circle. If they try to do anything but help Sam, John made a fist with his right hand and slammed it into his open palm. Remember the moose and the wolves? They all nodded and grinned. They had seen that lesson many times in Deja's classroom. Get some rocks, John told them. Kelly stripped off her parka, stretched her legs and knees. Okay, she said, let's do this. Sam lay down, clutching his leg. Ooh, it hurts. Help me. Don't overdo it, John said, and kicked some dirt on him, or they'll know it's a setup. John and Kelly crept towards the meadow and halted a few meters from the edge. He whispered to her, if you want me to be the rabbit. She slugged him hard in the shoulder. You think I can't do my part? I take it back, he said, rubbing his shoulder. John moved off 10 meters to her flank, took cover, and watched. Kelly emerged at the edge of the meadow, stepping into the illumination from the dropship's floodlights. Hey, she said and waved her arms over her head. Over here, you got any food? I'm starving. The men slowly stood and pulled out stun batons. There's one, John heard them whisper. I'll get her. The rest of you stay here and wait for the others. The man cautiously approached Kelly, a stun baton held behind his back, so she couldn't see it. She stayed put and waited for him to get closer. Hang on a sec, she said. I dropped my jacket back there. I'll be right back. She turned and ran. The man leaped after her, but she had already vanished into the shadows. Stop. This will be too easy, one of the other men said. Kids won't know what hit him, another remarked. Fish in a barrel. John had heard enough. He ran after Kelly, but realized that neither he nor the other man had a chance to catch her. He halted when he got close to where Sam lay. The man stopped. He looked around, his eyes not quite adjusted to the dark, then spotted Sam on the ground, holding his bloody leg. Please help me, Sam whimpered. It's broken. I got your broken leg right here, kid. The man raised his baton. John picked up a rock. He threw it, but missed. The man spun around. Who's there? Sam rolled to his feet and darted away. There was a rustling in the forest, then a hail of stones whistled through the trees, pelting the man. Kelly appeared and sidearmed a rock as hard as she could and hit the man dead in the center of the forehead. He toppled and slammed into the ground. The other children moved in. What do we do with him? Sam asked. It's just an excuse, right? Bajad said. He has to be with Mendez. John rolled the man over. A trickle of blood snaked from his head into his eye socket. You heard him, John whispered. You saw what he was going to do to Sam. Mendez or our trainers would never do that to us. Ever. He's got no uniform, no insignias. He's not one of us. John kicked the man in the face and then in the ribs. The man reflectively curled into a ball. Get his baton. Sam grabbed the weapon. He kicked him too. Now we go back and get the others, John told them. Kelly, you be the rabbit again. Just get them to the edge of the clearing, duck out, and let us do the rest. She nodded and started back to the meadow. The rest of the squad fanned out, collecting rocks along the way. After a minute, Kelly stepped onto the grassy field and shouted, That guy fell and hit his head over here. The 5 remaining men stood and ran toward her. When they were close enough, John whistled. The air suddenly swarmed with stones. The men held up their hands and tried to protect themselves. They dropped and covered their heads. John whistled again, and 75 children charged, screaming toward the bewildered men. The men got up to defend themselves. They looked stunned, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Sam smashed his baton over a man's head. Fajad was hit squarely in the face by one man's fist, and he fell. The men were overwhelmed by a wave of flesh, beaten to the ground with fists and stones and boots until they no longer moved. John stood over their bleeding bodies. He was mad. They would have hurt him and his squad. He wanted to kick in their skulls. He took a deep breath and then exhaled. He had better things to do and bigger problems to figure out. Anger would have to wait. Want to call Mendez now? Sam asked as he pulled Fajad shakily to his feet. Not yet, John told him. He marched onto the dropship. No one else was on board. John accessed the comm system and opened the mail link. He linked up with Deja. Her face appeared, a scratchy hologram hovering over the terminal. Good evening, Trainee 117, she said. Do you have a homework question? Kind of, he replied. One of Chief Petty Officer Mendez's assignments. Ah. After a moment's pause, she said, Very well. I'm in an Albatross dropship. There's no pilot, but I need to get home. Teach me to fly it, please. Deja shook her head. You're not rated to fly that craft, trainee, but I can help. Do you see that winged icon in the corner of your screen? Tap it. 3 times. John tapped it, and 100 icons and displays filled the screen. Touch the green arrows at 9 o'clock twice, she told him. He did, and then the words autopilot activated flashed on screen. I have control now, Deja said. I will get you home. Hang on a second, John said and ran outside. Everyone on board, double time. The children ran onto the ship. Kelly paused and asked, Who's getting left behind? No one, John said. Just get in. He made sure he was the last one on the ship, then said, Okay, Deja, get us out of here. The dropship's jets roared to life and rose into the sky. Let's let her break. John stood at attention in Chief Petty Officer Mendez's office. He had never been in here. No one had. A trickle of sweat dripped down his back. The dark wood paneling and the smell of cigar smoke made him feel claustrophobic. Mendez glowered at John as he read the report on his clipboard. The door opened and Dr. Halsey walked in. Mendez stood, gave her a curt nod, and then sat back in his padded chair. Hello, John, Dr. Halsey said. She sat across from Mendez, crossed her legs, and then adjusted her gray skirt. Dr. Halsey, John replied instantly. He saluted. None of the other grown-ups called him by his first name ever. He didn't understand why she did. Trainee 117, Mendez snapped. Tell me again why you stole UNSC property and why you attacked the men I had assigned to guard it. John wanted to explain that he was just doing what had to be done, that he was sorry, that he would do anything to make it up. But John knew that Chief hated whiners almost as much as he hated excuses. Sir, John said, the guards were out of uniform, no insignia. They failed to identify themselves, sir. Mendez mused over the report again. So it seems. And the ship? I took my squad home, sir. I was the last on board, so if anyone should have been left, I didn't ask for a passenger list, crewman. His voice softened to a growl, and he turned to Dr. Halsey. What are we going to do with this one? Do? She pushed her glasses higher on her nose and examined John. I think that's obvious, Chief. Make him a squad leader. That's the end of chapter 5. And thanks so much for joining in tonight. We do have another reading tomorrow with Jeff and 02. So I believe I might have gone a little bit over my time. But if it is all right, I guess I could do a couple of questions if people want any sort of questions. I'm not entirely sure. I'm also trying really hard not to scream because I know I messed up a couple of times. But I think if there's no questions, then I'll go ahead and end the chat here in maybe about a minute or so. There's like a bit of a delay, actually. Bravo! Also, my screen's over here. That's why I'm looking this way. I have a real nice setup. I guess we're good to go then. I'm gonna go ahead and I guess we can disconnect. See y'all tomorrow night. Tune in.